All right, I guess we can probably go ahead and get started. I think 30 seconds early is okay, maybe. Figure it out. Can everyone see me? I don't feel comfortable standing in a chair, but maybe if I do this, you can see my hands move up here. So thanks for sticking around. My talk, Hacking Web Apps. This is mostly kind of an introduction. So if you haven't started hacking web apps or something you want to get into, this talk is designed to sort of point you in the right path and kind of show you what I do as a pen tester from client kickoff call all the way to report delivery. So quick disclaimer. You can pause the video and read that later. Kickoff. So kickoff call, there's a few things that happen initially when the project starts. So once all the legal stuff has happened with the client, they've signed the paperwork and everything, what we do is we go over rules of engagement, where that basically clarifies what the scope is. Pages that they might not want us to touch that are sensitive, testing window, is it 24/7 or is it only business hours Monday through Friday, and information like that. Also the point of contacts, if you do have a question or if you happen to set their building on fire by some magical mystery, then you know who to call. Something to remember at the end of every assessment, a report is expected. Just keep this in mind, because as you go through, you're going to want to make sure to document as much as possible, because trust me, this does make your life much easier at the end, instead of thinking, oh shoot, I didn't save a screenshot for that cross-site scripting or whatever. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so how do I keep notes? Well, Keep Note, it's a convenient name for the application. It's built into Kali Linux. It's also available for Windows and the Mac OS, and it's a pretty cool way to store screenshots or code or anything else. You can make different pages. And the cool thing about it is that when you're done with it, you can actually export it all as HTML and give it right to the client if they want your raw notes, so they don't have to install any sort of special software for themselves. Couple of ways that I keep things organized. So if you have several items, if you have several websites or IPs in scope, you can group it by IP. Or if you're working on just a couple, usually what I'll do is I'll group it by vulnerability. And as you can see, like the darker red, like the maroon color, that would be my criticals. The red would be like the serious, and then like the orange would be medium, yellow is low, and then blue informational. That's just a personal preference, however you want to do it. But for me, that's just a quick visual way as I'm keeping track of what I've found. Evidence gathering. So just a few pro tips of what to document as you're going through and doing these assessments. Any HTTP request and response that you get, make sure to document those. So for example, if I have found a cross-site scripting vulnerability, I'm not only going to document the GET request that shows what I sent, I'm also going to document the response. I'm going to do code, and I'll also do a screenshot to show where the code executed. So make sure to document those things. Any unscheduled downtime or issues. So if for whatever reason they didn't properly whitelist you on their firewall, their IDS, IPS, and those were times that you couldn't access the website, just make a quick note on that. That way, if they have any issues going over the report, you can say, hey, I couldn't access your site during this time. Any monetary transactions, so it's a bank website or e-commerce or something, log that information. That way, if you do happen to use a personal card or company card, you can get your money back. Again, don't share any screenshots of any cool hacks. So if you happen to get root on a box or something, don't share that online. Disclosure agreement. So, just don't do it. It's not a good thing to do. Make sure you get relevant, legible screenshots. So for example, I know that's kind of hard to see back there, but if you find a really good, you say you get like SQL injection or something, make sure to take screenshots of legible parts of the output. So for SQL map, for example, Sometimes it can be a whole lot of output depending on the tables and things like that. If you need to copy and paste it into something that's more legible than just your terminal, do that. But just make sure that it's something the client can read so they can actually understand what it is they're looking at. A way that I like to call out my HTTP requests and responses is I like to highlight it, kind of put it as a code snippet. And for example, you can see where it says username equals and then just a basic check for SQL injection. You can see how I have that, if you want to call it the payload, is highlighted. That way, as the client is looking at the report, they can see exactly what caused the issue.
Guys, sorry I'm having to go through this.
And guys, sorry I'm having to go through this really, really quick. So if you have any questions or anything after the talk, please come see me. If you do find a SQL injection, for example, make sure you check every parameter that's in the application for all the same things, because if you find one parameter that's vulnerable to SQL injection, there could be 7 or 8 more that are vulnerable as well. So you want to make sure to check those and document all of those parameters under that finding.
It's something that I go by.
Because there's so many things to look at, and we do so many of these assessments as a methodology or checklist. You don't want to be necessarily confined to this checklist because they can change so much, but basically it's just something to kind of help keep you in order, just to make sure you're not forgetting to look at some big, obvious, glaring thing. Discovery, open source intelligence, these are things that we include in our methodology. And so basically what we would do is a client gives us a website, we would go look at not only the IP to see what other IPs that they have, or we would also want to check to see if there's any domain squatting or someone that's copying their site for a phishing site. And so learning to use tools like Pastebin and Google and all these things for open source intelligence is a great way to check to see not only if someone is trying to copy the site or do something malicious, but it's also a good way to see if this company has been compromised before. So you might be able to find leaked credentials or information that's already exposed to the internet from a previous hack. So that's a good thing that you want to make sure to do for every assessment. Through this, I found database types without having to do any enumeration. I've found entire database schemas. I've found old credentials, current credentials, and several things through developer forums, through archived emails, several things. So it's very time consuming, but it's definitely worth it, and it can pay off for sure. So discovery, to add more to the discovery OSINT, Discover is a great tool that I like to use. There's several out there, but one of the ones I go to first is Discover by Lee Baird, because it covers so many things so quick. So just make sure you check that out. Automated scanning. Yes, we use automated scanning. Well, you're supposed to be a real hacker. Why do you use automated scanning? I'll tell you why. Again, we do so many of these assessments so quick that they cover a lot of ground and look for a lot of low-hanging fruits. We don't ever just give them the results straight from the automated scanner, because an automated scanner is not a pen test, or a vulnerability scan is not a pen test. So we just kind of use that to see, okay, are there any big glaring holes that we could look at? And then, of course, we go through and we do false positive analysis and see if there's something we need to dig deeper. So it's just kind of a little added thing to help us cover a lot of ground really quick. It's a big time saver. And again, a vuln scan is not a pen test. And those who say that it is, I would beg to differ. So even though scanners help, again, we have to validate their findings to see, is it there, or was it just a scanner that totally misread something? Don't rely on those. Make sure you test it. A few automated scanners that we use are Nessus and IBM AppScan. Burp Suite Pro, that has some great automated scanning and a lot of add-ons that you can put in there with it to help make it even more valuable of a tool. And then you have things like Nick2. And then if it's a framework like WordPress or Joomla or Drupal or something like that, there are also tools. Again, WP Scan, that's for WordPress sites. Those are things that go through and look for just some major glaring holes, things that help you save time. And OWASP, Dirbuster, some people argue that this is a huge waste of time. Sometimes it is. Sometimes I've actually gotten some really valuable results from running this. Basically, if you're not familiar with it, what it does is it will actually, you can feed it a huge directory, names of directories, things that we'll go and search for, or it will do a true brute force. We'll start from, like 1 and all the way, like all the alphabet, and it will try all these different combinations. It can take a long time, but it's a good way to find some hidden directories. There's a lot more options in Kali that you can check. If you're not familiar, just check. This actually tells you exactly where to go in the menu. A few pro tips for automated scanning. Verify the settings. Don't just put in the URL and click go. You want to check how many threads are you running. Are you going to flood their system? Do you have safe checks on? Do you have certain denial of service things turned off? Just go through and look and make sure that you understand the tool before you just click go. Otherwise, you could potentially cause a lot of problems. Do they have any certain pages, like a contact page or a sign-up page or something that they want you to avoid? Otherwise, this can really just flood their database with a lot of junk, which could potentially cause denial of service or just a lot of extra work for the devs. Because sometimes you do tests in production environment and not a development environment. So those are all things that you'll want to check. And then when you're ready and you've got everything set up, then click go. Now the good stuff, manual testing. As I talked about, you want to take you want to go through and look at what the automated scanners have found. Did they find SQL injection? For example, if they did, take that, throw it in something like Burp Suite Pro or something where you can replay that attack, and you really dig into it to see if it's a false positive or not. Manual or automated scanners can only go so far. They can only do so much. There's that human element, the interaction just isn't there, so that's why you have to do manual testing to make it legitimate. Again, like I mentioned, Burp Suite Pro, you're going to hear me talk about that a lot because it's kind of a regular go-to tool for many things. There are also other tools out there for manual testing as far as proxy tools like the OWASP Zap. I'm sure you're familiar with that, and several other tools that you can do some research on. And I've kind of talked about some of this stuff. I'm trying to go through it as quick as I can here. Parameters, if you're not familiar with if you're not familiar with what parameters are in an application, there are several resources on the internet for free that will help you explain and understand that. Once you get a better understanding of what that is, you'll kind of know how to start diving into the application more. Let's see. Sometimes the parameters will be in the URL, or sometimes they're only in post requests. So just make sure you're sort of looking at the code and digging in and really trying to break the application in as many ways as possible. I'm just going to click through a few of these slides because there's so much information. Basic things you want to look for. Basic things you want to look for again: cross-site scripting, cross-site request forgery, SQL and LDAP injections, local and remote file inclusions. So again, use Google. Become familiar with those terms and exactly what they are, because you can really leverage those vulnerabilities for some really good attacks. Several times we've been able to completely compromise and even pivot further into networks through something simple like SQL injection. So just make sure, just become as familiar with that as you can. There are also several VMs that you can download and practice. I'm trying to think of the name of one right off. Like, I know OWASP has a few. Damn Vulnerable. There's so many out there right now, and there are even some that have specific scenarios for you to follow, almost like capture the flag type VMs. So just really practice those in your home lab to become familiar with the tools. So other things you want to look for, is there sensitive information being passed through a GET request? Just remember that those GET requests can be cached on the local user browser. So if something happens and that machine's compromised and there's credentials or something that are stored in the history from a GET request, the attacker could potentially get those and then leverage with that information. So that's just stuff that you want to check for. Now to prevent death by PowerPoint, picture of a happy dog with a hot dog for a second. So other things you want to check, just to make some more notes. Authentication. How are you authenticating to the application? Is it using SSL, TLS? Can you access certain pages as a non-authenticated user? Or maybe if you're just a regular level user and you see URLs in the code for an admin, can you access those admin pages as a non-admin user? So privilege escalation, things like that. Those are all things that you want to check for authentication for sure. Don't just look at the web app. You also want to look at the host that the web app is on. Do they have certain services open that shouldn't be there? Sometimes even externally we've seen remote desktop enabled. That's why would you have remote desktop enabled to the internet? Don't ask me that. It's a silly thing, but check those things because there could be other ways to compromise the host other than through the web app. So make sure to look at the host. Is it running an outdated install of IIS or something like that? That you could throw a good O-day at. HTTP methods. Do they have put, copy, delete, trace, or other methods enabled? Sometimes we found that put is enabled. So what do? We put a shell script up there, and we've automatically compromised that host just because we could put information up there. And then when we were done, delete was enabled, so we deleted it. So sounds really simple and kind of stupid, but those things are there. So you always want to make sure to check those to see if that's something you can leverage. Again, directory traversal, shell shock, heartbleed. So these are all things you want to look at for the host as well. So there are several things that you can, again, as I've mentioned, if you're using Google, there's several things you can find out about all the things I've talked about so far. Different methodologies. I highly recommend the methodology from OWASP, and basically what that's going to do is give you an outline of things to look at, help to keep you on track during your assessment to make sure you're trying to cover all the grounds of the application. Make sure you set up a practice lab. Don't ever try a new tool or something you're not familiar with on a client site for the first time, because it could be disastrous. And then when they say, well, what did you do? And you say, well, I don't know. That's never a good day. So always make sure you know what your tools are doing and practice them before you do it. And then once you get everything set up and you've practiced, then go hack some websites. So actually, I've got through this fast enough like I was hoping to leave time for Q&A. If anyone has any questions for me, please let me know. I have. Is it just like a vulnerability management for it, or? No, I have not. I'll have to check that out. Yeah. Any questions about tools or anything? Yeah. Yeah.
It kind of depends.
It kind of depends. Most of the time, and that's actually a good question. Most of the time, we tell the client, say like Monday and Tuesday will be the heaviest days for traffic, okay? So Monday and Tuesday we'll run an IBM app scan. We'll do it unauthenticated, and then we'll use credentials for an authenticated scan to see what it gets. And then later in the week what we'll do is we will look at the output and see if there's something worth going after, and we'll start validating that through Burp Suite.
Oh no, I wouldn't.
Oh no, I wouldn't proxy. That would be a lot of garbage, and
yeah, and that would be a gigantic.
yeah, and that would be a gigantic file too because of how much stuff.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
whenever we do an
Yeah, so whenever we do an automated scanner like Nessus or IBM App Scan or something, that's off by its side. You know, of course, it logs itself, so we'll do that, and then what we'll do is look at those results and replay the things that look interesting manually through Burp Suite Pro. So, did that answer your question? Cool.
For web applications?
For web applications, not so much. Mostly just to look at the host, just to see what the host is running, and it does a quick scan of, SSL, TLS, what ciphers they have enabled, if their certificate's valid, is it out of date, all the basic checks. But as far as the actual web app itself, no.
I know you can throw in.
I know you can throw in credentials and things like that, but I just I don't know that I would necessarily trust it as much. Not saying anything bad about Nessus because it's a great tool, but I don't think as far as like specifically for a web app. So it's a good question. Anybody else?
We have an ongoing debate internally about the criticality of the cross-site request forgery and the need for the explain options having a conference be as really as tools already.
Yeah, as soon as you see it, it's like, oh my God.
Yeah, as soon as you see it, it's like, oh my God, the world's gonna fall apart, right? It's kind of like it looks super serious when you see it, but as a pen tester, all of the applications I've looked at, I think maybe 2 or 3 that I actually classified that as a serious or critical, and it kind of depends on the application, what's going on. Now there are ways to leverage that, but then you have to look at what's the likelihood versus the risk as well. So really it's one of those things where you have to look at it, is it possible, what can you do with it, and then the likelihood versus risk. So it kind of just depends on the application and what the application's for. So unfortunately, like a lot of these things, there's not a absolutely 100% answer of yes, that's critical. So if you think that if you have suspicion that vulnerability is there, just keep doing research, keep beating away at that, because let's say like the most common way to do it, or like the proof of concept that Burp Suite Pro might give you, it's like, well, what does that matter? But say you really dig in and you start looking at obfuscation techniques, like encoding things certain ways that bypass your web application firewall, or certain things that you could, maybe get something in there that you couldn't just by a high level example. So I would encourage you to really dig into that and just beat it up as much as you can. That's a great point. And some will say, well, why do we need to turn that off? You're a hacker, you're supposed to be able to get around that. Well, yeah, there are ways that we can, but when you look at the contract, we usually only have 1 or 2 weeks to do this, and it takes quite a while to kind of fill that out and see like how you need to get things in and out of a web application firewall before you're being blocked. And so we say, look, just whitelist us, let us go through there, let us get past that as if we're an attacker that's already figured out. That way we know what's behind it. So you always want to have them whitelist you on the application firewall and any IDS, IPS that they might have as well. So you want to make sure that you're properly whitelisted so you get accurate results. So 2 minutes. All right. Any more questions? Thank you guys so much already for the questions you've asked. More? All right. Cool. Thank you guys so much. If you have any more questions, come see me. I'll be happy to answer them.